Hello, friend. I'm so glad you're here. This is such a cool topic. This is part of Pisces victory condition, which has to do with material salvage, upcycling, and creative reuse. I put this presentation a while ago, and I was going to go through and update it, but I decided to leave the slides themselves in their original condition and just elaborate in this voiceover. The spirit of what I really want to convey with this is that plastic is not some magical chemical that's out of our hands to manipulate and is some big company's problem and we can't possibly have an effect on. I want to really demonstrate just how malleable it is and how many different ways that we as individuals can leverage what is normally garbage into, not only diverting it from the waste stream, but potentially creating some side hustle income from it to help benefit our lives and our own individual goals and dreams. Obviously, this figure is no longer up to date, but right now, 8 million tons of plastics end up in the oceans every year. The actions of any just one of us may seem to be trivial, but the knowledge that there are hundreds of thousands of people who are doing the same thing, that really does have an effect. That quote from Sir David Attenborough, General of Taurus. So, I'm sure you've seen lots of videos about the various ocean cleanup projects, the boats and teams that have been commissioned to do large-scale uh, missions into the Gyre, for example, to try to clean up the ocean. That's not really what we're going to be talking about today. Today is about the preventing the wastefulness of the energy expenditure more so in the recycling process itself, and acknowledging that so much of what we assume goes off to be recycled that actually ends up being disposed of, and not much of it is very useful. So what we can do to make a much bigger difference is to catch it before it even enters into that system at all. And it's very much worthwhile for us to do that because it is a valuable material. So I'm going to go through a few case studies that I thought were particularly interesting in the ways that they have incentivized the collection of plastic and different things that they have helped empower people to do with them. And we'll take a look at those, and then I'll go much more in depth into ways that you, as an individual, perhaps with limitations on the space that you have to work in, or ventilation, or what have you, I'm going to try to give as many examples as I can of ways that you, even at a small scale, can start to use the material for yourself. The first of these is the plastic bank, which is a particularly cool concept and very effective, especially in island or coastal regions where there's a high risk of just the regular daily use plastic ending up into the ocean directly. And this is a collection location that is also a store that is selling everyday life necessities and even credits for something like school tuition that you can trade in found plastic, or plastic that you've discarded from your household, and get credit for it at the store in a more direct way than the typical bottle return, where only very specific things are counted and their value uh, has stagnated and hasn't been updated in I don't know how many years. How many of us really take bottles back to the store just because inflation has way exceeded the value of time it takes to individually insert them into machines. So diving deeper beyond innovations in the collection and the sorting and shredding, Precious Plastic is a very cool organization which then provides schematics and blueprints and instructional videos for how to create machines to process the plastic further and potentially make products out of it that can be sold. Although the different types of plastic need to be sorted and separated and shredded, and they have different melting temperatures, it's a lot more reasonable of a temperature range than maybe you would first imagine. And there's a lot that you can get away with even, at home in an apartment or a small space to work in. Extrusion and 3D printing is the most obvious way to do this, and at the time I put this together, that was much more in vogue and seemed to be a more prominent upcoming solution to plastic waste. Of course, 3D printing is not necessarily for everyone, and part of the drawback is that you do need to have the file. You need to have something that you want to have printed, but it's cool that recycled material can be fairly easily utilized as a filament as opposed to virgin filament material. You get into much more interesting territory, in my opinion, when you start considering the possibility of making your own molds for pressing plastic into. And here you see several examples of some of the beautiful marbling effects that you can achieve. All sorts of things like flatware or plates, or anything like tiles or cutting boards, making new handles for tools or implements. All of those kind of things can be achieved with pressing the hot material into a form. Precious Plastic teaches lots of cool ways to heat up plastic material, but by far the coolest way that I've found is with the humble kitchen implement, the panini press, which reaches the perfect melting temperature for HDPE plastic, which is especially important because this is a form that is not commonly accepted in recycling programs. Things like bottle caps, which you have to remove and dispose of separately, but is a really great plastic and comes in lots of bright, awesome colors, and in a short amount of time you can melt it on a panini press that has been fitted with a sheet of parchment paper or baking paper to prevent sticking, and you can create really great marbling and beautiful colorations. I want to take a moment and especially credit the boy who I originally learned this technique from. For me, he embodies the spirit of this craft and really inspired me to take it very seriously and think about potential implications of it. So his usage of it is particularly interesting in creating these plastic blocks that can then be manipulated with other tooling methods to get, as you see, the complex organic shapes involved in something like a slingshot. You can also see lots and lots of resin artists doing different composites, usually utilizing wood or markers or crayons or things like that, using a lathe or wood turner after they've created some sort of solid block, even doing things like embedding LEDs. And this is cool. You can also use plastic as a backfiller or embed it in resin to take up space, make it lightweight, save on cost of materials. And there are just so many really awesome possibilities involved in combining those materials. The part that I really want to impress about plastic as opposed to something like resin is the versatility of different types of molds that you can use with it. When you're working with resin, your only option really is to go with something like a silicone mold, which is great. It has great detail retention, it's fairly durable, you get a lot of uses out of it. You can make a positive for a silicone mold out of just about anything, not necessarily everything. Obviously, certain chemicals, especially latex-based ones, don't play very well with it, but you can get a form 3D printed and then make a silicone mold and get a lot of use out of it. However, if that's not really your workflow, you have the option when working with plastic and making molds out of metal or wood, which is very cool that it'll pop out of a wood form. So you can have a more traditional sculpting technique, carving into wood rather than, building up. Because it seems like, at least for me and my experience, people seem to have strengths either in removal of material for sculpting or adding of material. It seems like one is maybe more intuitive over the other for individuals. I'm not particularly great in the removing direction, but in additive sculpture I'm pretty okay. So it's cool that with plastic you get so many different options to get really great results. I talk a bit about the monetization of these types of products in another business-oriented video, which I'll link in the description. But I want to really emphasize that once you do a sculpt in either direction of any type, once you have a design, a positive, a buck, that's your IP. That's sometimes it seems like a big investment or a lot of work at the time to do a sculpt like that, but you get to continue profiting from that one design if you make a quality mold, for many iterations. So when it comes to having a side hustle for supplemental income, there's lots of different routes to take. Very commonly, people are using Kickstarter to order a large batch of a run of something, um, and that has a lot of downsides, especially when it comes to sustainability, because then you're stuck with this large quantity of product that you have to turn over, and that's kind of the classic retail woe. There's also the temptation to work exclusively in, one of a kind or custom or, original pieces that are sold as one-offs, and that's a very feast or famine way to do business. And it can be, all of these can be really great and really rewarding, depending on what you want and how it resonates with who you are and what you want to accomplish. But I would say for, most people who are having to work another job and are looking for something to supplement or to augment or to try to accelerate transition into a different type of lifestyle, mold making is probably the safest route as far as your return on investment and the amount of profit potential that you get from spending the time on a sculpt. I would say that, every single one of mine, when I've bothered to do this, has definitely at least paid for itself, if not made a pretty tidy profit for fairly little effort. And it's a huge added bonus that it's so easy to utilize recycled materials in the making of those type of products. So we've talked a bit about plastic on its own and with resin, and I'd like to switch gears now to talk about plastic when combined with different additives and the type of products that can be made. As we shift gears, the examples are going to be predominantly types of building materials because, of course, that's kind of my bias. But on our way there, I wanted to bring up this material, which you may be more familiar with, which is Warbler, and is actually a thermoplastic which is combined with what's basically sawdust. It's got the cellulose filler that allows it to have the characteristics that it does, and this is a common cosplay material, very expensive. Very few people on YouTube who are graciously demonstrating how to potentially make it yourself. But the main thing that I wanted to get across was the concept of that combination of different things, and I think there's a lot of great composites that we haven't yet thought of that could be very useful for incorporating recycled plastic into a more permanent form. So the previous example and this are basically the same material. You may be also familiar with this. This is Trex. This is a common wood substitute in applications like decks or outdoor gazebos, things like that, which are constantly exposed to sunlight. One of the main selling points and advantages of Trex over just building wooden walkway is the moisture resistance and the resistance to fading from exposure to sunlight. This is advertised as, being low maintenance, never needing to be sanded or painted or stained. And it comes with a few drawbacks, mostly to do with being vulnerable to fire for the reason that you would imagine, being that the additive is sawdust or wood pulp. So this material is made by completely mixing and melting down and extruding the plastic and its additive together. And there are many other types of laminate products that are produced in different stages and also made to emulate a wood texture, but I particularly like this example for its manufacturing simplicity, just as far as the mix and pour type of procedure. Having plastic as a binder also has a lot of advantages in colder or wetter climates. It has a lot of resistance to cracking and to temperature fluctuations. The freeze-thaw cycle that typically plagues us here in the north. Plastic is proving to be an interesting additive in different outdoor applications, including but not limited to roadways themselves. So moving on from the previous examples, which were geared mostly towards individuals with limited amount of space, this would be something more suitable for someone looking to start a business that has access to something like a workshop or a shed or a garage, or would like to involve multiple people or members of their community. There are lots of really incredible businesses around the world that have started up based on different plastic composite products. Here we have some examples of building materials such as pavers or siding boards, and my personal favorite, which is roof tiles. I think these are absolutely gorgeous. I love the look of tile roofs, and they have a lot of advantages over, something like conventional asphalt tiles, which need to be replaced very regularly. They degrade and are all around kind of gross. These are produced with basically the same procedure as what the panini press would be providing, except at a larger scale. These products use sand as a filler, things like pavers and roof tiles and siding panels and things like that. This installation is particularly cool, shown here. The permeable pavers are great for managing water runoff and preventing flooding and allowing water to return to the table, and they can even be utilized for water filtration and catching systems in areas that don't get a lot of rainfall. It's great to do. The composite is more lightweight than cinder blocks, and that becomes really important when it comes to manufacturing and shipment, especially to remote job sites or places where there isn't as much logistical infrastructure. So, of course, a lot of these larger scale projects are out of reach for us as individuals, but on a community level, recycling plastic can be implemented for things such as road surfaces. While this might not be a great ultimate long-term solution, it's certainly important for us to explore alternatives such as this during the transition to make sure that we even make it long enough to figure out what the ideal solution would be. It's certainly a big step above our current protocols with road paving and surfacing and coating of asphalts for things like parking lots. Those chemicals are extremely disgusting, and we should, at the very least, stop doing it that way. What makes that application particularly cool is if you're not worried about the quality of the plastic for going into something like a consumer product, you are a lot more free to use mixed plastic types and plastic that wasn't able to be sorted, such as that which is recovered from waterways or from the ocean. This is achieved by melting the plastic along a gradient of different temperatures along an extrusion tube, and several different companies have perfected machines to do this for use in building materials. Another perhaps dated example, but I like it a lot, is this park, which I believe is in France. And these modules were produced in much the same fashion as the coasters that we saw earlier. They have these planting areas for Riverside Park to be planted, and I believe they also have some structure on the underside to allow for sheltering of things like baby fish and aquatic plants and things like that. The ability of plastic to float is what makes it particularly interesting as a building material, and especially interesting, of course, under the jurisdiction of Pisces, because it starts to raise all of these questions about what might be possible if we were to better integrate our water-based environments with our cities or with our land-style dwelling. What creative solutions could we come up with if we started to entertain the possibility of using the water in that way? And a lot of the restriction when it comes to seasteading or with working with saltwater in particular is corrosion, which affects things like metal a lot more, and plastic not so much. It has a lot of resilience in that type of condition. So I invite you to dream with me for a moment as I present some concept art from ideas that I've had about how we might better integrate these would-be toxic and harmful byproducts of the life we live right now into a sustainable future. I envision facilities where we might be able to live and work, extracting plastic directly from the ocean and processing it, and creating what might be planters for plants which have salt tolerance or resilience. They could create scaffolding for us to cultivate coral and restore the reefs. We could leverage advantages that are provided by oceanic environments to creating solar power and the higher efficiency that we can get. Beyond pure research or manufacturing facilities, maybe we could dream of building cities that are vibrant and beautiful to live in, that help to take some of the burden off of our very dense urban centers and allow for people to spread out and have a place of their own to create a life where they are free to explore their passions. If the way that we live on land is taxing the environment, maybe we can start to imagine a way to live at sea that would provide the sort of modern conveniences that we're looking for without being as much of a drain. And in this vision, what I was the most fascinated with is the possibility of growing forests in the ocean. We have already far exceeded the point where even reforesting what has been lost might not be enough to mitigate the effects. Thank you so much for spending this time to daydream with me. I hope some of the information was helpful to you and that you carry this spirit of possibility forward into the rest of your day. Thank you, friend.